In typical video essay fashion, I have to start with an overly complex intro to communicate a simple idea, so here it is. Aristotle established in his works over virtue ethics the idea of the golden mean. Between the vices of deficiency and excess, you have the perfect point in the middle. This is the golden mean. This is just a fancy way of saying that too much or too little of anything is usually bad. When it comes to gaming, we have had so many open world games over the past decade that most people are tired of the gimmick and are okay with typical level-oriented games. We have given women so much freedom that they think they are better than us. Sorry, that was too based for YouTube. But in all seriousness, when it comes to film, we have some very prevalent examples of this. Think about superhero movies. We had an absurd amount of them in the 2010s especially, to the point where everyone, at least everyone who was not an NPC, got sick of them. You could say the same about other genres. Like after The Silence of the Lambs, there was an abundance of detective movies, some good, some bad. However, I would contend that we are starting to see this with the biopic. As Hollywood's idea jar runs empty, they have turned to dramatizing the lives of real people. And while I enjoy these films for the most part, it gets to the point where you wonder if the biopic is going to be milked dry like everything else. Don't get me wrong, I loved Oppenheimer and the Iron Claw. You also have some other great biopics that came out this year, but I do have some concerns on what this means for the future of film. The two main concerns that I have are this: how do you decide what you can cut and what you can't for a biopic? In other words, how far can you bend the truth? And for the sake of suspense, I will tell you my second concern after I elaborate on this one. Bending the truth for entertainment is not always a good thing. The prime example of this is Napoleon. I found the film to be entertaining, but the primary issue that everyone had with it was the lack of historical accuracy. I'll give you another example of a much less controversial biopic from this year, The Iron Claw. I loved this movie, and I am a professional wrestling fan, but one change this film had was the omission of Chris Von Erich, since it was deemed too much tragedy in one film. As a side note, this film is one of those rare exceptions where I wouldn't mind a 3-hour movie to tell the full tragedy, since the film doesn't show us the full aftermath. But nonetheless, was cutting Chris the wrong move? I'll leave that decision up to you. But generally, biopics condense an abundance of information for the sake of simplicity and making the content easy to digest for audiences. Schindler's List is a great example of this, where numerous accounts would be combined to be relayed from one character. The opposite of this can be seen in David Fincher's Zodiac, which tries to stay as true to the case as possible, which leads to many extraneous leads since the film is replicating history instead of simplifying it. So where do you draw the line? Obviously, this is incredibly subjective, but I think we have to work this out for uniformity on the part of the biopic. If you let writers, directors, and studios go completely loose, then you end up with situations like Napoleon. But if you expect them to completely adhere to history, then you may get a less captivating film. Personally, I like the approach of Schindler's List to the issue, where multiple narratives are combined into one character, but I can see how this can also be problematic. This combining of narratives can sometimes be an issue, and I would argue that we see this in The Iron Claw, since elements of Chris Von Erich are combined into his brother Mike. Some, like myself, may view this as a disservice to Chris, and keep in mind that I really enjoyed the film, so don't call me a hater in the comments. If it were up to me, I would have extended the film to include Chris and to relay the full story. But where do you draw the line of simplicity? Where is the golden mean? You think I have an answer? I'm a YouTuber. We point out issues and never provide solutions. I really think it's a case-by-case basis where the importance of what to cut differs on each situation. This is one of those rare times where I will use the cop-out answer of "it depends," since I don't think there is a uniform solution to this. But please let me know what you think in the comments below. Now let's move on to my second and final issue with biopics. But before we get into that, this is a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button. Only 2.3% of people who watched my videos over the last month were subscribed. I have a better chance of flipping a coin and it landing on heads 5 times in a row than having a subscriber watch my video, which is not really that bad now I say it. So if you subscribe, statistically speaking, you are more elite than a student admitted into Harvard. So come on, you might as well subscribe. I mean, it's pretty based if you do. Anyways, back to the video. My second concern with biopics is what are you going to do when you run out? There's only so many interesting people you can make a biopic over, and sooner or later, Hollywood is going to run dry, and this happened with the other popular genres of the past. Once you run out of the really interesting figures in history, what do you do? Do you turn to slightly less interesting people and add fluff to their lives to make them just as captivating? This goes back to the first concern I have with the biopic, where there is no set line on what you can alter in a person's story. Some biopics are incredibly faithful to the original inspiration, whereas others are willing to stray for the sake of entertainment. I genuinely believe that once we run out of the super interesting figures in history, we're going to see biopics take some more liberty with their source material to make those stories just as fascinating as the others. But all of this will eventually lead to the same place. And that is when we have covered virtually every entertaining figure in history. And then what happens? What do you do? I do think we have a long time before we reach this point, but the larger point I am trying to make is that biopics shouldn't be the temporary solution Hollywood uses to avoid original stories. I think biopics are a great genre, and I am happy that so many deserving people get to have their stories known. But as it pertains to the future of film, I want to see Hollywood embracing lesser known writers and more unique stories. You have some studios that are already doing this, like A24, and I hope that we see more of this in the future, with Hollywood accepting people who may not be as well known as the Martin Scorseses or Greta Gerwigs of the world. I love biopics, and I really do want them to continue, but I hope we don't get comfortable with this being the complete future of film, as it's just a bandage on a much larger wound.